Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church into the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Now, here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. This is Lauren Richmond Jr., and today I'm welcoming Reverend Melissa St. Clair. Melissa has served as Heart of the Rockies Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Fort Collins, Colorado since 2013. She was called to succeed the congregation's founding pastor. After 2 years of serving as the associate minister, she was installed as senior minister in January of 2015. She was ordained in 2008 at her home church, St. John's United Church of Christ in Pennsylvania, where her immediate and extended family still reside. Her Master of Divinity is from Eden Theological Seminary in St. Louis. Melissa currently serves as moderator for the Central Rocky Mountain region and has previously served as the chair of the Board of Stewards for the Center for Faith and Giving. She is an alumni of Bethany Fellows and a graduate of Leadership Northern Colorado. She currently serves on the leadership team of the Ecumenical Circle of the Bethany Fellows. Melissa loves running the trails and camping in the mountains of Colorado. She and her spouse, Ben, recently moved to the foothills of the Front Range where they savor the mountain views and the gravel road that gets them there. Her passion for affordable and attainable housing has grown out of their love for where they live and a desire to live in a sustainable, inclusive community. All right, we're here with Reverend Melissa St. Clair. Thanks so much for being here, Melissa. Anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you?
Thanks for having me, Lauren. I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation with you, and I've been enjoying listening to other conversations that have been happening on the podcast. I think my bio gives a high-level version of who I am and where I am right now, but a little bit of background. I grew up in South Central Pennsylvania, 15 miles from Gettysburg and about 2 hours from Washington, D.C. And I joke that my ministry has had me continually moving westward. And so I think by the time I retire, I'll be in Hawaii, which would not be a bad thing. But
No.
I've attended seminary in St. Louis, Missouri, served churches in Kansas City, Missouri, right outside Springfield, Missouri, in a town called Republic, and then have been here in Fort Collins with Heart of the Rockies Christian Church for the past 10 years, and really grateful to call Colorado home. It's a place that we love. We love the people. We love the mountains, of course, and just the vibe here has been one that's been a great fit for my husband and I.
I did not realize you had a time in the Ozarks.
I did indeed. I was at First Christian Church in Republic, Missouri, from 2010 to 2012. It was shortly after that the TV show came out, which was really interesting to watch in light of our experiences there. But
I have deeper connections to the Ozarks. We'll have to talk offline here. Share about your story of faith, kind of what that looked like in the past, what that looks like today.
Yeah, my predecessor here at Heart of the Rockies, Jeff Wright, introduced me to a phrase that faith is caught, not taught. And I really think that applies to my journey of faith. I grew up in United Church of Christ congregation in my hometown. My parents were both very active in their churches growing up, and then also as they parented my brother and I. And so for me, faith early on, I don't want to say it was just mimicry. I think there were opportunities to make that faith my own, but I saw how much it mattered to my parents. I saw what they modeled for me. And I was fortunate to be part of a faith community that really nurtured me, sustained me, encouraged me, gave me opportunities to explore what vocational ministry might look like. And so I had a really positive experience of church growing up, and I think that was very closely linked to what I understood it meant to be a Christian.
It's interesting. Faith is caught, not taught. Speaks to the importance of, faith formation, right? Faith practices. Broadly speaking,
I think it's that idea that that it's something that we do and we explore, not something that's just doctrinally passed down to us from generation to generation.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I suppose, meaningful spiritual practices, what's something that's meaningful for you you're willing to share?
I will say that I think my understanding of what it means to be a Christian has changed a bit over time, and so I think my spiritual practices are sort of a reflection of that. To me now, being a Christian is certainly linked to life in intentional community. For me, that is the church during this season of my life. But it really comes down to just following after Jesus. And I know I know a lot of people who are just really good people. And that's not necessarily related to their relationship with Jesus. But for me, like, I need Jesus. I need someone who is modeling what it means to be faithful, what it means to listen to the voices of not the voiceless, but those whose voices have been oppressed or silenced. I need someone who reminds me of what it means to take time to rest and to be faithful in prayer. And that is really one of my most meaningful spiritual practices and has been, I think, really throughout my life and certainly throughout the years I've spent serving the church in congregational ministry. And I actually preached a little bit about this my first Sunday. I just returned from a 13-week sabbatical, very generously granted by Heart of the Rockies after 10 years of service and also after my first 5 years of service. But I was talking a little bit about my prayer life and just how my understanding of prayer has changed. Again, early on, my mom was the one who taught me how to pray. We would do devotions every morning. She would pray, and then my brother and I would basically repeat what she said and maybe add our own little twist to it as we got older. But then it was really when I went to seminary that I got interested in, like, okay, what is prayer? Like, what is the definition of prayer? What are different practices? I was convinced that I wasn't praying right. I'm also an Enneagram 1, FYI. And so I actually found a spiritual director, which is a practice that I still engage to this day. Actually just restarted that practice within the last year, but I found a Catholic spiritual director and she had me praying the Liturgy of the Hours. And it turns out that was not the practice for me. But it gave me some permission to think about prayer more broadly than I had before. And I think that it was really the Bethany Fellows that steeped me in that practice of prayer. Bethany Fellows is a ministry that sustains congregations by supporting pastors in the early years of congregational ministry. And prayer is so essential to how that ministry operates, to how it's undergirded, to how it's lived out in relationship to those pastors and the relationship between mentors and fellows. And so that, for me, it just comes back to prayer and that time that I spend in a variety of ways, but intentionally being in conversation with the God I know through Jesus Christ.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Thanks for sharing that. So I had Melissa on to talk about a housing project happening at her church, Heart of the Rockies Christian Church. But I think maybe before we get into the nuts and bolts of that, I kind of want to just hear Heart of the Rockies is, I guess in context, right? In mainline context, a fairly newer, young, maybe young is a better word, younger church in mainline Protestant tradition. Why don't you just tell a little bit kind of about the story of Heart of the Rockies?
Yeah, we're a young adult now. We just celebrated our 30th birthday. And
okay, 30 years. Yeah.
I think like many young adults, we are still trying to be faithful in thinking about not just who we've been, but also who God is calling us to be. I think Heartside Hill has certainly been a big part of that. But more broadly speaking, Heart of the Rockies Christian Church was founded by the Central Rocky Mountain region in 1992. A pastoral advisory committee started meeting. They are the ones who called our founding pastor, who I mentioned earlier. We weren't yet worshiping in a building. that was our own. We started, as many new church starts do, we started worshiping in an elementary school. Shout out to Cruz Elementary, that still holds a dear place in our hearts. We worshiped in gymnasiums, and I think there was also another like an arts academy in there, and our early years were nomadic. But a really important part of that early history was also in 1993. Our first worship service was the Sunday before Palm Sunday in 1993. And it was that same year that the Central Rocky Mountain region of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, purchased 11 acres of land for our congregation. Which was really visionary at that time. I obviously was not around when that happened.
Right.
But from what I understand about the process, we're in a subdivision that was in the very early stages of being built out. And this land initially went up for sale after the developer abandoned the project. We made an offer on it. The region made an offer on it. Then they came back and said, actually, this is going up for auction. And our bid was the offer we made. There wasn't any more money to put toward that. We obviously, as we now know, that property ended up belonging to the Central Rocky Mountain region, which actually has been true throughout the course of our congregation's history. We did build our current church building in 1999, took occupancy in early 2000. But throughout that, we kept asking ourselves the question, do we want to own the land or do we want the region to own the land? And not to get too far into the nuts and bolts, but for us, it was really important. It's not traditional necessarily for disciples to have the land owned by the middle judicatory. But that was important to us because we felt like, we're covenant partners with the region. It just makes good sense for them to protect their investment, but it also protects our congregation in the event that someone would come in and try to steeplejack our congregation, or the church would take a different direction. And so that has been the case up until the region transferred the land to the partnership between Heart of the Rockies Christian Church and Clair Housing, which is one of our partners for Heartside Hill, and they're also serving as the master developer.
Well, let's talk about kind of that, you alluded to it a little bit, the dream of Heartside Hill. How did that dream begin?
Yeah, that dream began decades ago. I think our congregation has always had a sense, and I hear people talk about it in terms of like, this is our DNA. We don't have a vision to become a very large church. Granted, by mainline Protestant standards, also, we are a fairly middle-sized congregation. We worship well over 100 people every Sunday morning, both in person and online, and have about 250 members, active members currently. So this is a dream that this congregation first started exploring in 2006. At that time, there was a vision that emerged from our founding pastor and from other congregational leaders in those days of a kids' campus. And it actually had a name. It was called Sky Hill. The sky was strengthening kids and youth. And Sky Hill is really important to the story of Heartside Hill because although we had some fits and starts, the first pause on that project was in 2008 when the recession hit. Obviously, economically, there were just not a lot of resources available for a project like that. Our county, Larimer County, decided to invest in some other models of providing services for children and youth. And so we had to put that dream on the shelf for a little while. We picked it back up in 2014, which was about a year after I arrived. One of our potential partners in Sky Hill came back and said to us, hey, are you still interested? We would love to talk further about partnership. And so that reopened a new chapter for Sky Hill that involved, again, kind of revisioning the model. Rather than building out a whole campus as one project, we looked into the possibility of having each partner fund their own particular space and then find ways where there could be overlap and efficiencies built in to make the project more cost effective for everyone. And also just to share resources beyond financial, that are kind of those service-based things. We finally had to release that dream in 2019. We realized that the model that we were working toward, the potential partners we had and had been in relationship with, we didn't see a clear way forward to bring Sky Hill to fruition. And so that was a really hard thing to do because it did represent, even at that point, a decades-long dream for our congregation.
Right.
Which again, I mentioned, we don't have aspirations of being a megachurch. If we get larger than 500 active members, we would start a new congregation. And so we knew we didn't need all the land that we had. We've developed 2 acres of it. But so even before Sky Hill emerged, we knew we're going to do something with this land someday that benefits our community. And so we went back to the congregation. We went back to the congregation in 2019 and said, do we still want to do this? Are we still committed to bringing something to fruition here at 6501 Brittany Street that will not just be part of who Heart of the Rockies is, but that will serve our community and impact it in a powerful and life-changing way. That's our mission statement at Heart of the Rockies: loving God, serving others, changing lives. And we mention it every Sunday in the worship service. We see it every Sunday when we walk out of the doors of the church building. And so it didn't surprise me that the congregation said, yes, we still want to do something. Now, the something took a little bit longer to evolve. Some of those early ideas included a water park with the biggest water slide in Colorado.
Oh, wow.
We also invited our kids to be part of this process.
Okay.
To a prairie dog sanctuary, which takes on special irony that I will mention later in our conversation. So, there were, we really were open to what God might be calling us to do, what aligned with our passions and values as a congregation. And so those conversations were really important that we had with the whole congregation and not just with our key leaders or with our board.
Let me ask a question that comes to mind, and you may need to tread lightly here, but I just can't help but ask, thinking about 2019, right? Obviously, you didn't have the future vision of knowing what was coming with COVID, but I mean, even 2019, mainline church, broadly speaking, not economically booming. The church could have said, you know what, we gave it a good run. We tried. It's not meant to be. Now, obviously, there's some complications with you all not owning the land per se. I'm curious, were there conversations about, we should just sell this, split the money, or give the money to the region, or try to get some of the money for ourselves? Were there those conversations, and what kind of drove the congregation to be like, you know what, we still believe in the mission of this property?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and one that we've had an opportunity to talk with a lot of folks about, particularly our neighbors, our actual physical neighbors here in our subdivision. And that is that although we did have conversations about what are some potential sources of impetus, right, to get a project started. And of course, we had to acknowledge that selling off a portion of this land to have funds to do something else that fulfills our mission with the land, of course, that's a consideration, right? Because when you're really committed to a vision, you want to explore all the possibilities there are of being able to bring it to fruition. To my knowledge, there have never been any serious conversations about selling the land. We have really seen it as a gift that was given to us by the Central Rocky Mountain region. We are to be faithful stewards of it. Again, if our congregation were in a different position, that might look different for us.
Yeah.
But because we are financially solvent, because folks here are really generous, they practice generosity, and they practice it often. And that's not to say we don't struggle. I think every church, every institution, I won't limit that to church, has struggled, particularly since the pandemic. But the vision has just been so much a part of the story that we tell about who we are, that it would have been hard to imagine a future in which there wasn't something that came to fruition on this land that was not commercial, that was not made out of financial gain, with financial gain as the motive. And so, yes, we've had about every conversation there is to have, and it was pretty clear that vision still was a powerful life force in our congregation.
That's so interesting because I'm thinking back. Hopefully you listened to this one, Melissa, with Dr. David Anderson Hooker, and he talked about narrative, the power of narrative kind of driving the congregation. I remember he used the illustration of like the highway. It seems like your highway for your congregation has been that vision of using that land as ministry to bless others. I'm thinking of another author who I've had on, Andrew Root, who talks about one of his books about a congregational watchword. I'm hearing these things, so it's just fascinating how that vision has continued to drive, if you will, your congregation. I need to ask like another hard question here and talk about funding. I work in affordable housing right now. Myself and the company I work for just is in the midst of building a property, and there's a groundbreaking, and they had all the bigwigs out and passed out flyers, and had some numbers, and holy cow, the numbers were astounding as far as expense goes. And the numbers had only gone up in the last couple of years since they started the project. So, obviously, you may need to protect some confidentialities here. But I'm curious what you can share about funding and how that came about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was very much a barrier, particularly in the early days of Sky Hill. And I think that's evidenced in the way that when we resumed conversations in 2014, that we spent a lot of time trying to figure out a more viable funding model. For comparison, when we were looking at building out Sky Hill, in its entirety as a campus, the price tag was about $15 million in that 2006 to 2008 timeframe. Right now, looking at the entirety of Heartside Hill, which I can explain a little bit more about what all Heartside Hill entails a little bit later. But the price tag right now is sitting in the neighborhood of $40 million. There's been a point in this project where every month we would get a projected cost, and it was going up at about 1% a month.
Yeah.
And so that is a reality. And that's, again, why partnership has been so vital to us. Again, I think that part of that is just in our DNA, right? I think of the image that Paul gives us of the one body, many members. I think we see our congregation that way. And then more broadly, I think we see us as a faith community in relationship to others who share our vision and values as also being part of that one body. They may not have, a religiously or a faith-based mission. Although interestingly, all of our partners do have some sort of faith component, which was not, we didn't say that's a requirement for partnering with us on this project, but that's what's happened. So as far as the funding, there are, again, we're doing this in partnership. And so there are a couple sources of that, including low-income tax credits that will help bring to fruition care housings, around 70 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom apartments. that will be part
Wow.
of the campus.
Yeah.
Habitat for Humanity, as many of our listeners likely know, have their own funding model where they do work in collaboration with commercial entities, as far as I understand it. But they also do a lot of fundraising through individual donors, through community resources, things like that. And so they have their own mechanism of fundraising. Same with L'Arche Fort Collins. They are in their early stages as an organization. They recently achieved project status from the national chapter of L'Arche, which is a huge deal. It says that the national organization believes that they have the capacity to bring to fruition their first project, which will be 2 host homes that will be part of Sky Hill. I should add there will be 9 single-family homes that Habitat for Humanity is building. And the particular model they're using for the 9 homes that will be part of Hartside Hill, they have a partnership with our local school district. And so high school students are building half of a house over the course of a school year. Those 2 halves get brought to the site, and the finished work is done by volunteers. And so there are several different mechanisms of funding. There's also the money that the church has raised. We started a capital campaign this spring, and we're successful. I think by every measure that we had, in terms of raising even more than our initial goal. We didn't quite make it to our stretch goal, but we were within $50,000 of that, and just felt really good about the way that reflects our congregation's confidence in what we're doing with Hartside Hill. And I should say that those dollars that we raised are for space that we will have in a community building that is being partially funded by the congregation, partially funded through Care Housing, and then also for renovations and a bit of expansion of our existing building. We have about 7,000 square feet currently, and it's not a lot of space to do the type of ministry.
Yeah, some houses bigger than that, probably not too far from you.
Yes, you are absolutely right.
Talk through, if you would, maybe kind of give me like obviously this is a podcast, so we can't do it visually, but maybe give me and our listeners kind of a mental map, maybe of like, you've kind of mentioned the different players involved. If you can sort of lay out like what that's going to look like on the land.
Sure. And I can give you a link for the show notes to our Hartside Hill website. Does have a site plan. So if you are more of a visual person, I love podcasts, but I am like totally a visual learner. So the church building currently sits in the far northwest part of the 11 acres. Those are the 2 acres we had subdivided when we built our current building. There will be a community building that is just south of our existing building and is being designed in such a way that it looks consistent with our existing building, and also feels kind of like a campus. There will be a courtyard that connects our building and the community building. And again, we will have space in there that we are paying for, that will be ours to use exclusively. I say that, and by exclusively, I mean we have a ton of partners that currently use our building, and we anticipate that will just continue and probably even deepen with the addition of the community building and the expansion of our current building. We then south of that, along the Trilby corridor, there are already multifamily homes that are right across the street from us. And the land, there's also a downward slope. And so we can put apartment buildings there without having as big of a visual impact as it would otherwise. And it's also consistent with the other housing that's closest to it.
Yeah.
If you go back up to the north side of the lot, there will be the 9 single-family Habitat for Humanity homes. Again, that puts them on Brittany Street. that's adjacent to the subdivision that we're in. And so those are all single family homes. So again, the type of housing will be consistent on both sides of the street. There will also be 2 host homes that L'Arche is building. Those will be integrated in to that northern part of the property with the Habitat for Humanity homes, and they will essentially look like single family homes as well. So the design has been really intentional to maximize the space that we have, right? And there always have to be the ingresses and the egresses and the drainage and, those factors. And we want this to really be a community and not just cool, there's a lot of housing here, but really places for people who live in those homes to gather, to garden, to have a birthday party, to walk. That aspect is really important to us. And so it seems kind of crowded when you think about it, but when you see the site plan, we actually did not have to rezone for this project, which was huge.
Yeah.
That removed what could have been a pretty immediate barrier. But again, our commitment is to a community where people thrive, and so you need those spaces where that can happen too.
So you mentioned the existing neighborhoods. I'm just curious here, thinking about being in, living in a neighborhood myself and living in Colorado. It seems like everybody always screams out whenever there's talk about dense housing of any kind, property values and, so how did it go with the existing neighbors? Sound like you've been developing some relationships with them in time, but were there any, bumps along the road? How did you handle those?
Sure. Yeah, we have hosted for many years the HOA meeting for our for the subdivision that we're in. And, when invited, we've always had someone present there to just kind of give an update on here's what's happening at the church. Here's what's upcoming. Thank you so much, for being good neighbors. I think there are other things that we've done. Again, just trying to be the kind of neighbor that we want to have. And so over the years, we've done things like hosting food truck rallies and, inviting the whole neighborhood to come down for live music and food trucks. Our playground is open to the neighborhood. It's rare that on a nice day I walk out of the church and someone isn't, rollerblading in the parking lot or playing on the playground equipment. We've really, again, tried to be the type of neighbors that we want to have, which is generous with what we have, welcoming, inclusive. And so I think that has definitely helped to be building that up over time instead of just all of a sudden trying to, like Brene Brown would say, like hotwire that connection,
Right.
So, that said, once the congregation voted to move forward with the 3 primary partners that we identified for what is now Hartside Hill, it didn't have a name yet. Actually, it did. We called it the next big thing. It eventually had its own name. But we sent a letter out to everyone within, it was like a 3 or a 5 mile radius. Don't quote me on that, but just a letter from us saying, we have made this decision. We wanted you to hear it from us before the required neighborhood meetings, before our local newspaper picked up on it, before you heard it anywhere else. And that was really important to us. And so we, in addition to what the city required for its own development process, we had additional meetings for our neighbors that we asked the city to facilitate. But that has been a really important part of the process and one that we've taken really seriously because we do value our neighbors and we want our current neighbors to be good neighbors to our future neighbors, right? Like that piece is important to us too. Yes, I mean, certainly there has been some of that pushback. You're right. I think that fear or that just uncertainty is very prevalent probably anywhere, but certainly in Colorado where housing is just a huge deal. And so that's where, again, having partners has been huge because believe it or not, Habitat for Humanity has built subdivisions in our community before. Same with Care Housing. This is not their first project. And so they have a lot of wisdom to share with us around here's kind of what you can expect. Here's actually the data. The data suggests that
that's good.
Affordable housing or multifamily housing does not reduce property values. And so having them to help us navigate that has been just such an asset and has given us confidence to say, with clarity and with the knowledge that we need to back it up that some of the things that you're concerned about, we hear. They're absolutely valid concerns. And here's what we know from the data. So we've had a few bigger kerfluffles, but because this is a public podcast, I will not detail those here. But
she's still standing though, and the church is still standing.
The church is still standing, and not all of the Google reviews have been taken down yet. So you can find it on your own.
All right. Well, speaking of negative reviews here, I'm going to make a hard transition or play off that. There's some who might say, you know what, housing is great, but it's just not the work of the church. What do you say? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can understand why folks might say that, depending on how they view what the church is and why the church exists. I think about Jesus' ministry and how, the Bible never talks about, well, where did Jesus live? Or when Jesus went home to his house at night. We're left to believe that Jesus relied on the hospitality and the generosity of others to have a place to live, to thrive, to do what it was that he was on this earth to do. I think about the history of the church and how, house churches, were that model early on. And I think, if you don't home is so much more than just a roof over your head and, a place to sleep at night. Like home is sacred. In many ways, it at its best, it is a sanctuary, a refuge. It's our place to be away from how we have to show up in the world or how we have to perform in the world or what the world asks us or expects us to do. And so to say that's not the work of the church, that's hard for me to believe, just because of our history and who we are. And I think even more recently, I think, we have a legacy here in Colorado and in the Central Rocky Mountain region of the Tennyson Center and the residential housing that they have historically provided for children that need a safe environment to be in. And so, again, I see us doing this work, and to me, it doesn't feel disconnected from our faith in Jesus Christ or our belief in what the church is or should be.
Yeah. Thanks for engaging that with me. So, what kind of advice would you give to a pastor or a church who's like, we have a chunk of land we don't know what to do with? Hopefully going to have him on. I've had him on in the past, but Mark Elsden, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's doing a lot of work around church property. And I don't know if it's his data or someone else's data saying that, theoretically there's going to be the largest land transition. I don't know. It's just going to be enormous because of land transitions. And I know, I think one of the things that he says is, sometimes those churches are developed for, mega homes, and I would freaking love to live in an old church, frankly, but I can't afford it. And frankly, few people can. And, I'm biased. I'd love to see the churches remain churches, but the reality is many will not. So what is your thought to a pastor or a church who they have a chunk of land, or they want to transition to at least to some of that, perhaps to land? What are some first steps? I wouldn't even know where to begin, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, to use a phrase we often use, I think that's really contextual. But I will say, I think that, and I think folks at Heart of the Rockies know this about me. For years, when we were kind of in those in-between phases, I was kind of like, oh man, like, I would love to see affordable housing here, but that's just me. Like, that's not where the congregation is at. That's not what the congregation is saying. If I, met with our mission partners or people in the community and they asked me about it, I would be very clear and say, I could see this. And that's not what we're working toward right now. And so when we got to the point where we went back to the congregation and said, are we still called to do something with this land? And it was an overwhelming yes. I worked with our board to kind of envision two potential paths. I think there are more. I think there are always more, but I saw kind of two ways that could give us the clearing we needed to move forward. And one of those would be to work with the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. They have had a congregational land grant campaign. I'm not sure how active it is at the moment because I know they did have some staff transitions. And I'm not sure the status of that program. But I said, if we were clear that we wanted to go the route of affordable housing, I would absolutely say partner with them. They've come up to Fort Collins. They've done presentations. They have great resources at their disposal to work with congregations in that process. I said, if we're not clear that affordable housing is our path, then I think we need to work with a consultant who can help us put together a process for how we move forward. Because again, churches do a lot of things and do them amazingly well when we're at our best. Like developing land or identifying tens of millions of dollars project, like
the best skill set.
Not exactly in our wheelhouse. So we went the route of working with a local consultant. Her name is Laura Nelson. She's an ordained UCC minister. She is fabulous in so many ways, but she used a process with us called compression planning that just helped us move from, we put all these ideas up on big easel pads to what would it actually look like to seek partners who could bring a project to fruition with us. And the way I've described it to folks is I think the shift we made was from having partners come to us and share their hopes and dreams to saying, this is who we are. These are our hopes and dreams. These are our values.
I love it.
We are looking for people who will come alongside of us in that. And
I love it.
The deliverable, so to speak, from that process was a request for proposal. And so that request for proposal made it clear that, we were not an open and affirming congregation yet at that time. We were in the process. And our value statement or our welcome statement at that time explicitly named the LGBTQ community. So we, there were some things that we were clear on because we didn't want that to be a surprise to people.
Right.
There were some things that we got clear on for ourselves. For example, we said, a successful proposal will come from an organization that has a proven track record of financial solvency and has the capacity to bring a project from the initial phases to groundbreaking within 2 years. Because, we sensed that the congregation was ready. Like we didn't want to use up any more time or energy or goodwill on maybe this could happen someday. And so I think those pieces were really key. And I will say communication is just so vital to this whole process. And we have certainly had missteps, things that we could have done better, things that we weren't as clear on as a Heartside Hill core team as we could have been with the congregation. But again, I think a church has to catch this vision. It can't just be the pastor. And a story that I've told not all that often is but now I'll tell it to the internet. How about that?
That's what podcasting is for.
When I returned from my first sabbatical after my first 5 years of ministry, which had included our pastoral transition from our founding pastor to me serving in that role, through other staffing changes, through just the anxiety that comes with big transition and the uncertainty. I came back from that sabbatical and was working with a clergy coach at the time. And I can just remember sitting in my office and just praying, like, God, if something is going to come to fruition with this land, because this timing was again around the point where we were letting go of Sky Hill, I said, if this really is your vision, your dream for our land, then there needs to be people who can do that in our congregation. It cannot be me. I don't have the skills. I don't have the bandwidth. I believe in this, and I need help in it. And so that prayer has been answered. I don't even know. I don't know how many times over, because we have an incredible group of lay leaders that do the day in. They could answer every question that you have asked me today as thoroughly, if not more, about finance and governance and communication and the partnership, like all of it. It is truly the congregation's vision, which it needs to be, right? Because a pastor is finite.
Yeah.
We are, even in a mutual call system like we have as disciples, this is going to outlast my tenure as a pastor at Heart of the Rockies. This is going to outlast folks' lifetimes who are currently members of Heart of the Rockies. So it needs to be the congregation that makes the commitment and has the vision.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that story. I love that. Appreciate you sharing that. I was going to ask something else, but I guess I'll just say this. I'm reflecting on how much of a journey this was. I mean, 2006, 2014, 2019, now we're in 2023. When is groundbreaking, by the way?
I'm so glad you asked. It is Thursday, October 5th.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And you all are invited.
Nearly what? 18 years? I'm not a math person, but
it's been a long time.
That's a commitment.
It is. And again, I think that's why it has to be the congregation's commitment, because in that time, we've had 2 different senior ministers. We've had a number of associate ministers. We've had leaders come and go and move on. And so again, if it weren't part of our congregation's DNA narrative, however you want to capture that essence, we wouldn't be here. That takes faithfulness from not just individuals, but from the whole body.
Yeah. Well, let's take a break here real quick. I was going to ask you anything else before we take a break? Anything else just been dying to say about Hardside Hill? I've not given you a chance to.
I told Lauren before we started the podcast, I could talk about Hardside Hill all day.
Yeah.
So rein me in when you need to. But again, I would say the Hardside Hill website, our Heart of the Rockies website, heartoftherockies.org are great places to keep up to date with what's happening and to just see the journey unfold.
Awesome. All right, let's take a quick break. All right, we're back with the Reverend Melissa St. Clair, and thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate the conversation, and we'll make sure we include those links in the show notes here for our listeners. So some closing questions here you can take as seriously or not as you'd like to, but if you're Pope for a day, and I encourage folks to take that as metaphorically as they'd like to, what would that day look like for you?
Okay, so I have listened to your podcast, and people's answers are like so deep. I did not go metaphorical. I went literal.
Okay,
I would
that's
try on all the hats and all the shoes and taste test all the gelato within walking distance of the Vatican.
The hat does get mentioned fairly often, so maybe you need to go back.
But the shoes.
Yeah, the shoes.
It's all about the shoe collection.
A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
Oh man, Rachel Held Evans is who comes to mind immediately.
Yeah.
I think part of it is that she is a peer. That we are the same age.
Parent.
Absolutely.
Young kids.
And her voice. I just feel like the church has been so changed by her voice. And I turn to her writings again and again, whether it's about the Bible or stories in it, whether it's about faith and how faith evolves, how we talk about hard theological concepts. I grieve that the world will not get any more of her voice.
What was her last book she published before she passed? I mean, that was such a great book.
Yeah, there was a book that came out that she was working on when she died, and I have not read that one yet either. But I believe Inspired was the last one, and that was taking stories from the Bible and telling them in a really accessible and faithful way.
Yeah. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place? Our listeners can't see the eye roll that just happened there.
I know.
That's the answer, maybe.
I really do. I hope that we remember how the pandemic has changed us. I think that as we look back over this period in history, there are a whole lot of things that are so layered that we are dealing with. And I hope that we can remember how the pandemic, what it meant for the church, how it changed the church in ways that I think we will never go back. We being Heart of the Rockies, we being the Church Universal. I do not think we're going back to who we were before the pandemic. And certainly we're not as humans. And I think we've not given ourselves enough space to acknowledge how we've been impacted, even if we didn't have COVID. I've not yet, knock on wood. I hope as long as this podcast is available online, I will have not contracted COVID. But it absolutely impacted the way that I am a pastor and a person and a partner. And I hope that we can just be gracious with ourselves for what we have survived during this time and place in history.
Yeah, let me ask you this, if I may, and this is out of order, so forgive me if this comes off. But I'm just thinking about what you said there. I'm thinking about you've been through now 2 sabbaticals, which is frankly good to have gone through 2 sabbaticals and come back to your church. You've been through some battles, whether literal or metaphorical. I can't help but think that as we're recording this, I think it's this week, there's been an article come out that's really just swept across the clergy context, especially mainline clergy. You worked with Bethany Fellows. Can I just press upon you, if you can speak maybe to some words of, I don't know, wisdom or something to share with clergy out there who are going through this time?
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it wisdom. I think maybe experience. Sure. I did read the article. I have been really interested to follow folks' reaction to it. Really, the first thing that came to me was, oh my gosh, like we all need, as clergy, we need support systems outside of our congregations. I do not take for granted. There's not a day when I take for granted what an amazing congregation Heart of the Rockies is, how much they love their pastors, how committed they are to their faith and to living it out. That is just an incredible gift. And as you said, it's not been easy. It is not easy. There are times when I have been part of that statistic that I've thought, I need to get out of here. I told our personnel team this last fall, I said, I am burnt out. And I thought I could make it till sabbatical, but I am not going to make it to sabbatical this way. And so we talked through some of the things I needed to pare back on and just some concrete ways that I needed to care for myself to make it to that sabbatical. That's amazing. I want that for every pastor. And I know it's not the reality. So that then it becomes even more imperative that you have those support systems outside the church. And for me, that is Bethany Fellows. That is a local group of colleagues that are like-minded and that we we actually have a group. Our group that meets for lunch is actually called the No Agenda, No Budget clergy group, because it's just that important to us that we're in relationship with each other, so that when I don't know, do you bleep this show? When the bleep hits the fan, we all, we know who we can turn to, and we already know each other. And so I think without that, without the friends I have in ministry, without the friends I have outside of ministry, without our neighbors, without the community that my husband has so beautifully cultivated around us, because that's who he is, this would all be a lot harder.
Well, thanks for sharing that. How about let me close with this then. What are your hopes in the future for pastors?
Yeah. Whew. Yeah, that's an even tougher question for me than what are your hopes for the future of Christianity?
I mean, you can answer that too, since I gave you that one.
I've done my homework. I do think as far as the future of Christianity, to me, that boils down to Jesus and community. We cannot lose sight of who Jesus is, of how Jesus lived, and of what that means for us today. I think if we're doing that, then whatever happens with the church is going to be a faithful outcome of that. And again, same with the community piece. I love the church. I am unapologetic about that. I also know the church has harmed people that I love. It has harmed me. And it has done some irreparable damage in people's lives. And I don't say that lightly, because I do believe that Jesus is a redeemer, and a healer, but the damage can be so, so deep. And so again, I think how we do community, I anticipate, I hope that will change. I think it needs to change. But again, I think if we have Jesus and community, that for me is the future of Christianity. And so by extension, that is our future as pastors. I frankly don't know how we do the important work that we are called to do and still support our lives. Or as one of my mentors, Gary Straub, says, how we make our lives work, which is just kind of a way to say, how does the economic piece, the work-life balance piece, how does that get worked out? I frankly don't know what that will look like.
Yeah.
I don't have any illusion that I will be a congregational pastor for my entire career. I think, frankly, they were telling us that when we were in seminary in the early 2000s, that likely we would not have a lifelong sustainable career in congregational ministry.
Right.
But I do want to be a part of what is next.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for engaging that with me. Why don't you share one more time for our listeners, Hardside Hill, the various websites they can check that out and check you out if you want.
Yeah.
If they want to connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. heartoftherockies.org. We have a new website coming in the next couple of months, so check it out now, but come back later. I think you'll really like what you see there, and I think you'll get a clear sense of who we are. heartsidehill.com doesn't get updated a ton, but it does give you the site plan and a general overview of the partnership that exists there. And we'd love it if you would give us a follow on our socials. We're at Heart of the Rockies CC on Instagram and Facebook. And thanks to our incredible associate minister, Wendy, we've got great content there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Melissa, I really appreciate the time and the conversation. I always leave folks with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
And also with you. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romig-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.